Hello and welcome to another episode of the Rant Show. I'm joined by the one and only Peter. Peter, how are you?
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you for asking. Now, we've got some breaking news happening. Well, not so much breaking, I guess. I guess if it's breaking the airline industry, and that is the one and only Virgin Australia, which used to be Virgin Blue, which, yeah, they're basically looking like they're going to go under.
Won't be the first Australian airline to do that.
No, I think Ansett was the first airline to do that, but Virgin Australia has. Well, we spoke about it last week on the show and saying how they're overspending on sponsorship deals. They had a deal with supercars, which basically renamed the whole V8 supercars to Virgin Australia supercars. Now, this is really interesting because for me, I didn't know who owned the majority of Airlines until just recently. Now, the Australian government or Scott Morrison has basically come out and said that he's not going to bail out Virgin Australia.
Yeah,
And I was kind of like, well, maybe we should bail out Virgin Australia.
I
Um,
disagree.
Oh, after what I just found out, I kind of disagree as well. And it's a bit of a shock. I don't think people realize just how an airline, definitely Virgin Australia, could be so foreign owned.
It's less than 10% Australian.
Yeah, well, look, we'll get into that in a second. But my question is, like, we saw Ansett just die down and basically collapse due to, I guess, poor finances.
Well, just very briefly, Ansett Airlines Australia was actually owned by Air New Zealand at the time of its collapse.
What?
And Air New Zealand was in trouble
Yep.
financially, and it was using its ownership of Ansett to keep it in the air. So it was refueling Air New Zealand aircraft on the Ansett credit card.
Yep.
It was pulling out all of the spare parts that Ansett had in Australia and taking them to New Zealand for Air New Zealand aircraft. It was basically
Yeah.
stripping it bare of its assets. And then and they were not replacing it with new aircraft. The aircraft were old and, it was being run down. They just ran it down, stripped everything off it, and then threw it away. That's basically what happened to Ansett Airlines
Yeah, no, look, Ansett was Australian at least, or well, somewhat Australian, and
originally.
originally, and as you just said, like it was sold to Air New Zealand, and basically poor mismanagement. Now I remember, oh god, I can't remember how old I was, but I know when I lived in Melbourne, when I arrived in Melbourne, got to see the old terminals that were the Ansett terminals, as well as their base of operations. Like they still have until recently, they still had a sign saying Ansett Australia or
Did they?
Ansett, yeah, in Melbourne. Now I think it's the Age has actually brought that building or started leasing it out, so it's now called the Age, which is a newspaper over in Melbourne. It's
The terminal, the city building for Ansett was on the corner of Swanson and Franklin Street.
I think that one went pretty quickly, but I'm talking about the one near the airport, the one that was made out
Oh,
of glass, that shaped like a plane's wing. That one was Ansett, one of the headquarters, I guess, or maybe a training center for Ansett. I'm not quite sure, but that one has now gone to a uh, the newspaper people. Anyway,
right. Okay.
we're not here to talk about Ansett. They're in the past, and it looks like Virgin's going to be in the past too. So where do we think the Virgin has gone? Because I want tonight's show to be a bit more about just where do we think Virgin went wrong?
Well, as you know, Virgin started off, it was owned by partly by Sir Richard Branson and also by some Australian businessmen. And they, the Australian businessmen then sold out to overseas operators, overseas airlines. And they made their money and they were happy. Um, Virgin Blue was a cut price type airline. They operated on very low margins. And then the new owners wanted to move it more in alignment with Qantas. And they went through a hybrid period where they were all things to all people, both cut price but also full service airline. And then eventually they moved to being a full service airline, and they bought Tiger Air from Singapore Airlines as their cut price arm. So they could have Tiger Air Australia operating as cut price, and then they could use Virgin Australia as the full service, shall we call it, quality airline.
It's really
And
interesting
that
that
put them in direct competition with Qantas.
it's really interesting that you say that because, like, we'll get to the shareholders in just a second, but this is the thing. Like, they started off as the budget airline with Virgin Blue, and they did really, really well. Virgin was getting more traction here in Australia. People were trusting the brand. Their safety record was pretty good. I think they nearly matched Qantas in some aspects. Then they decided to take the next leap, which was to a rebranding of their airline and really basically partner with another airline which had Tiger Airways, as you said, Singapore Airlines. And that was a really interesting move because here we are, we built trust in Virgin Blue. Then we were told, no, we're going to rebrand, we're going to rejuice, as they would say, and try to compete on a global scale, and call ourselves Virgin Australia. Now,
they wanted to go international, and they were running flights to the US, they were running flights obviously to New Zealand, and various other countries. They were running Bali, obviously, but they were running international flights, which meant they were really trying to take on Qantas one for one.
And I think that, look, I guess, like, I remember my very first Virgin flight being where basically I didn't get food, I didn't get drink, I basically was carry-on luggage only, and that was Virgin for a very long time.
Virgin Blue.
Yeah, that was Virgin Blue. And now the interesting thing was then they moved to Virgin Australia, which for many years was a success. Like, no doubt. Their shares were always low. I think that's that. I followed their shares. I do not have any shares in Virgin Australia, and it looks like I won't be able to get any shares in Virgin Australia. I think last week I said, "Oh yeah, I'll support Virgin. I'll buy shares."
You did. You did.
Funny enough, I stand by that. I absolutely would if they can see themselves through this period. I think that they are a strong airline to compete with Virgin. To compete with Qantas.
I'm a kind of Qantas / Jetstar person.
Yep. And I'm a Virgin person.
I actually do have a Virgin
Velocity
membership card, but it's only when I have to fly Virgin. And I mean, there are times when Qantas is booked up, so I'll get on Virgin because they always have empty seats.
Well, see, that's the thing. I get it. It's the spirit of Australia. You want to support Australia, people. You want to get behind behind Qantas. But this is the tricky part because I want to lightly cover this part because competition in Australia is mandatory. Basically, there has to be competition, or at least the possibility of competition. Now, in the last 20 minutes, we have learnt that there are a few people who are scouting around Virgin Australia. We'll get to that in a little bit. So I don't think Virgin's all out just yet. I think that Virgin may not be Virgin much longer. I think someone will buy it and rebrand it. There's a few airlines circling the Virgin Airlines group. But the interesting thing here is the shareholders. Now, I want to just quickly let you know, allow our listeners know that Scott Morrison said he won't be bailing out Virgin Australia because they have deep pockets, meaning the shareholders have deep pockets. Now,
correct.
Let's talk about some of the shareholders. Now, we have Sir Richard Branson, or the Virgin Group. They hold 10% shares. Etihad Airways, they own 21% shares.
They're probably the top airline in the world, by the way. They're probably, if they're not number one, they're number 2 or 3 as far as profit is concerned, as far as efficiency is concerned, money.
It's interesting you say that because Etihad Airways had Etihad Stadium in Melbourne. Now that's being renamed to Marvel Stadium. So my question there is maybe Etihad's not as financially stable as we think because if
Remember, that's naming rights only. So they
totally.
paid a fee. They paid a fee for the naming rights
But the
for a
question,
certain period of time.
but the question is, why did they drop their naming right? Because okay, they may have not been able to match Disney's naming right offer. However, that's a really big warning flag in my book to give up the naming right of a stadium if you're doing really well, and Etihad has been doing really well. They got great customer service. I have never flown them, but the reviews online and the reviews on their Facebook page, the YouTube, all that kind of stuff, they seem to know what they're doing. Yes, they've had some incidences, but majority of the time, they're pretty good. Now, the next one on the list is Singapore Airlines. Now, Singapore Airlines had Tiger Airlines. Now, I take it there would have been a part of a deal where, because Virgin took over Tiger Airways, there would have been a share. A part of the deal would have been the 20% of shares.
No,
You don't reckon?
no, I know so.
Okay, tell us how Tiger Airways became Virgin, or part of Virgin.
Okay, Singapore Airlines had their 20% in Virgin Australia. And Virgin Airlines had moved from being Virgin Blue cut price to being Virgin Australia full service airline. That left a space in the Australian skies only occupied by Jetstar, as far as a cut price airline is concerned. Jetstar owned by Qantas. Singapore Airlines has always been in direct competition with Qantas.
Yep.
And Singapore Airlines already had Tiger Air flying in Asia. So
Sure.
they had some cut price flights flying between Singapore and Australia. And they then moved Tiger Air into Australia as a cut price airline owned by Singapore Airlines to run in direct competition with Jetstar, which is owned in Australia by Qantas.
Yep.
And Tiger Air could not crack a profit. It was disastrous. You might remember they were grounded for quite some time because something like 15 of their aircraft were found to be unairworthy.
Yep.
Or their pilots were unqualified or something. And they got grounded. And it was just being run very, very unprofessionally within Australia. And so Singapore Airlines, after it got its license back for Tiger Air to start flying in Australia again, they sold it to Virgin Australia for $1. So Virgin Australia bought all the aircraft, the whole lot, from Singapore Airlines, which is a 20% owner of Virgin Australia, for $1.
Yep.
So that then they could run Tiger Air Australia as their cut price airline in direct competition with Jetstar, while Virgin Australia would be running as the full service airline. In other words, they do both in competition with Qantas on the one hand and with Jetstar on the other.
Yeah. It is really interesting because I'm just trying to read out as much information as we can live on air about. Just found a Forbes article which is quite interesting, saying that Qantas won't benefit from Virgin basically disappearing.
Excuse me. I don't think that they will, because Virgin will be replaced by new owners. Now, the new owners may possibly rename it. I'll make something up, all right? I'll just make something up. Let's just say, just for example, that, I don't know, Air New Zealand was to buy it, which they won't, okay? Let's just say that Air New Zealand was to buy Virgin Australia. They could either continue to run it, potentially, they could continue to run it under the name of Virgin Australia and bring with that all the goodwill that Virgin Australia already has. People who choose to fly Virgin Australia would choose to fly the new Virgin Australia, even though it has different ownership. Or they could reflag it and call it Air New Zealand Australia, or something.
Yeah, they
like
could
that.
call it ABC Air.
They could call it They could call it Compass. Now that would be original, wouldn't it?
No.
I say that as a joke because there have been two airlines in Australia called Compass, and both of them went broke.
Maybe they could call it Trump Airline because that seems to keep going down. Anyway, no, let's just.
No, they could use a completely new name,
Sure.
but then they have to build from the start, from nothing. They have to build that trust, if you like, with the domestic flying market. Or they can take the existing one and go with that if they can get the name.
The problem, well, this is the thing. Sir Richard Branson owns the naming rights to Virgin Australia, or to the word Virgin. Now, exactly, the money side is the key. Now, clearly, Richard Branson, with all his money in the bank, he's not going to bail this company out. He's not going to buy it. That's not Richard Branson's way. He doesn't buy airlines. He leases his name out. That he's a leaser, not a I'm going to support this company properly. 10% shares that he owns, and now look, he's a really good publicity person. If you have him on the publicity books, your brand is going to take off. Except for the cases like Virgin Money, Virgin Mobile, these are brands that actually didn't work here in Australia.
Virgin Records.
Virgin Records was another one which had stores in Myers that died. I remember when just before Nova FM, he tried to buy the license to well, it wasn't called Nova, but 93.7 and all the national Nova stations. He tried to put a bid in to buy the license for that, so he could have Virgin Radio here in Australia. And he wasn't able to get the money for that, or the people weren't able to outbid Nova Entertainment. So we see a lot of Sir Richard Branson's businesses, or sub-businesses as you want, or leased businesses, whatever you want to call it, just collapse. And look, there's no shortage of examples. We just named a few of them. Virgin Records, which has been brought out by record labels. You've got his mobile phone company, which got brought out by I believe, Boost.
Yeah, but I'm making a point now, and that is, one, it would be a good thing for the new owners, whoever they may be, to carry the name Virgin Australia forwards, because they would have the impetus, they'd have the momentum for the new owners to keep that airline going, the same look, the same name. And at the same time, it would also be a good thing for Branson to carry that forward, because he saves face. He looks okay because the airline carrying his business name is still in the air.
But see, I don't think he does save face, because if I was Sir Richard Branson right now, I would be ringing up people and trying to get them to buy the shares, or put my hand in my pocket and buy my own shares. Like I understand that right now we've got a pandemic, we've got COVID that's really shut down the industry. Now, it was reported that they needed $1.4 billion, I believe it was. I don't actually have the note in front of me, to actually rescue Virgin Australia. My question is, where did they go wrong? Did they buy it? Was the purchasing of Tiger Airways the wrong move? Was it a number of things? Was it that they lost who they were, because they were the budget airlines? Then they tried to be the big boy airlines. I
believe that Virgin Australia, and I'm not talking about Virgin Blue, I'm talking about Virgin Australia, I believe, has never cracked a profit.
No.
And from that perspective, it would not have been a good one for you to buy shares in.
No, but it's not so much about whether or not you buy shares into a business, it's whether you believe in the company's value. At least that's why you should be buying. Like, I get it, people buy shares to make profit, totally get that, but yeah, that's business. But at the same time, when you, like, I actually, at the core value of that business, even knowing they weren't making a profit, I think they made some smart moves in the airline industry. Maybe not the smart direction, whoever the CEO has been for the last few years, because of this V8 supercar deal that they signed. I thought that was the worst deal that they could ever sign, mainly because V8 supercars isn't even on free-to-air TV. As, like, if you're going to sponsor something, sponsor the AFL or sponsor the NRL. At least you get them on free to air TV.
the CEO of Virgin was the 2IC of Qantas. Was previously the 2IC of
Ooh.
Qantas.
So
In other words, he knew what made Qantas tick. He knew the ins and outs of Qantas, and then he moved across to Virgin. Well, that's why they got him.
yep.
Because if they wanted to be in competition with Qantas, who better to lead the company than the man who had been number two at Qantas and knew everything about the company?
And I think that's 100% right. Like at the end of the day, you do want to just move. You do want to get the people that have been in the industry a long time, and that's with any business slash company. You want to make sure that you get the right people behind you. But there rises the question. I'm sure he's not someone who tried to go out and harm Virgin's portfolio and crash
No.
it. I think he had maybe good intentions for the publicity, but you're a young airline. You haven't been around for, well, you're never going to be around for as long as Qantas has. But Qantas,
Nearly 100 years.
yeah, but well, Qantas is over 100 years. But the thing is, Qantas doesn't really well. Yeah, I can't even think of a sport that they sponsor except for the Olympics.
Now, I don't think it's about that. I do know. I do know for
Well,
a fact
I've raised that.
that the original Australian owners of Virgin Blue were petrol heads,
No, the reason why.
and I guess that that's sort of fast cars and all that stuff is in the DNA of Virgin.
Yeah, but no, but see, I see it a little bit different because I think that uh, if you look, I get it. They got publicity. They got a huge amount of publicity for being part of Virgin. Sorry, part of the V8 supercars, and they got naming rights and all that kind of stuff. And the trade off was free travel basically for that company or for that sporting group. The the problem I find is here you have more competition coming into Australia because of the Australian rules and Australian regulations. Basically, according to Forbes.com, Virgin was in the business but weak, fulfilling the need for competition but not growing. So they were filling the space of a competitor but not growing. It was seemingly a worthy challenge or challenger, yet Qantas showed with domestic performance, international rejuvenation, and a lucrative loyalty program. The point that I was trying to get to, and I was trying to actually, I thought I had it saved to the point that I was getting to, which was the Australian government relaxed ownership laws in Australia, making it easy to establish a new entrant. Basically, it sounds like anyone could enter Australian Airlines or the Australian Airlines space race, and you don't have to be Australian.
Well,
Like, I get it. Like, we want competition. But
I mean, if you think about it, if we go right back to the days of Ansett, in the earlier days of Ansett, we're talking about a long time ago now, 20 years ago, whatever. But even further back, in the early days of Ansett Airlines, it was Australian owned. Okay. Then, at some point, maybe because it needed more money coming in or something, Singapore Airlines and Air New Zealand became shareholders in Ansett Airlines.
Yep.
Then somewhere along the line, Singapore backed out of that, leaving Air New Zealand in ownership, and that's when it went bad for Ansett because Air New Zealand, who, by the way, the CEO of Air New Zealand at the time was an Australian, he stripped Ansett in order to keep Air New Zealand in the air because it was in trouble. And Ansett crashed. And Virgin Blue existed at that time. There were two minor companies, I call them minor companies, that existed at that time. One was Virgin Blue, which was a cut price airline, and the other one, oh, I can't remember what it was called. Was it Australian Airlines? It was something anyway, and they used a galah, a parrot, as their
I don't
logo.
I don't remember that one. But
Well, they were bought out by Qantas. Qantas
interesting.
bought them out and basically turned them um,
Jetstar.
into Jetstar, and Virgin Blue grabbed what was left in the wake of Ansett and became number two.
Look, it's we're talking about airlines and we're talking about competition, and this is the interesting thing. Same article from Forbes.com. Qantas may publicly argue against government support to Virgin. Well, they did publicly argue against it. Qantas' remarks have been so prevalent and strong that the Australian competition regulators are investigating whether Qantas breached competition laws, sought to lessen or loosen or lessen competition and spread misinformation. Now, it does seem like Qantas may have, to me at least, tried to get out their competitor. They didn't want the government to bail them out. And we should say that the Australian government has an invested interest in Qantas. So why would the Australian government, like, realistically, why would the government bail out a company that they don't have an invested interest in?
Yeah.
Like
Why? Look. Let's put it this way, and we haven't talked about the shareholdings of
we haven't talked about
Virgin
the rest of
Australia
them.
yet. But the fact is, it's less than 10% owned by Australians.
So let's go
It
through.
is 90% owned by foreigners.
So let's go through the shareholders. We've got up to Etihad Airways, which I'll just repeat. Richard Branson owns 10%. Etihad Airways owns 21%. Singapore
Correct.
Airlines owns 20%. HNA, which is Chinese owned, owns
It's a
20%.
Chinese conglomerate.
Yep. And
Yeah.
I can't pronounce the last one, so I'm just going to give it a good
The
go.
Nanshan Group.
Thank you. Owns 20%, meaning that the Chinese country owns approximately 40% of Virgin Australia.
Chinese government owns 40% of Virgin Australia. The
It should also
Singapore government owns another 20%. That means those two countries own 60% of that airline. And
yeah. Let's just also just state here that the free flow or the overflow, which is 9% shares, is owned by people or by other businesses. We're not quite sure who owns them. We haven't been told, but I wouldn't be surprised that if a lot of them are Chinese people who own Virgin Australia shares. Which could potentially.
Do you mean the free float?
I'm talking about the free flow. I'm talking about the free flow.
Yeah. Well, the free float could be
anyone.
People like you.
Yep.
People like you. They could be.
It would
Chinese
be. It would be good to get a breakdown. If I know we most never will. I guess we could always request one from ASIC.
But whatever the case is, you see the way they structure that 9%. It means that the Chinese government owns 40%. Even if they owned all of that 9%, they still only have 49% of the company, which is less than half.
But isn't that? But wouldn't you need 50 to 51% depending on things. But
have a controlling interest.
But then we have to think about what other. So Etihad Airways and Singapore Airlines. I know that Singapore Airlines is owned by the Singapore government. From my understanding, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So, but do they own all of it?
I believe they own all of it.
Okay, when
they also own all of Optus.
Wow, interesting.
100% of Optus.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to find if I can find Singapore Airlines shareholders. So bear with me, just to double check while we're live on air. But it's really interesting.
So the question is, isn't it? Why would the owners of Virgin Australia be asking the Australian government for a loan to keep the airline in the air when the owners are the Chinese government, the Singapore government, and I believe a Middle Eastern government? Why would they, who are all wealthy, be asking the Australian government to borrow money
So we actually
to
have a
loan to them.
so we actually do have a breakdown of Singapore Airlines shareholders. So we can tell you that the majority of the shares, or 55.46%, is owned by Tesmaki Holding. That's TEMASEK Holding Private
Yeah,
Limited. Then they have DBS Nominees Pte Ltd with
yeah,
11.18%.
yep,
Citibank Nominees Singapore, so Citibank in Singapore owns
yep,
6%. DBSN Services Pte Ltd owns 2.9%.
yep,
HSBC Singapore owns 2.17%.
yep,
Raffles Nominees owns 2.17%, and
yep.
United Overseas Bank owns 0.62%. Look, there are plenty more I could keep reading out. I'm just seeing if there's realistically the list of major shareholders as of the 30th of June 2017. It hasn't been updated since. Sits at 81.86%. So
And how many of those holding companies are owned by the Chinese government? By the Singapore government? You don't know. I know. I know.
that's the thing. Like they say Singapore, but doesn't mean that they're Singapore Airlines. So my question is, and I can't do the deep diving because I don't have time. But I'm sure there will be someone out there who will deep dive those companies and actually see what relationship they have with China. Because I don't think it's all like I think that China has a bit more pull in this.
Well,
And
you just said the bank HSBC,
yep, which is very focused in China.
which is Chinese.
Yep. So we can definitely say that even the Singapore Airlines, which may have 20% Virgin Airline stock, a controlling part of that is Chinese owned bank, which is HSBC. So could we maybe say that roughly 50% of 50% of Virgin Airlines is Chinese? From the point of view, as if you
It
deep
might
dive
be.
into shares of other companies, it gets into a very messy situation. How much, and I think this is the question that the government's saying, and maybe rightfully so, how much of Virgin Australia is actually Australian versus how much of it is foreign owned or
And
Chinese owned?
to put it very simply, very little of Virgin Australia is Australian owned. Definitely less than 10%.
So my question, and I know that this comes down to the rules and regulations. Personally, I sit on the fence that you should not be allowed to use the word Australia if your company is not owned 51% or higher in Australia.
Well,
I just think that I just think that
it's
it's
based in Brisbane.
it's
It's
no
based in Australia.
it's no it's tricking people to think that they're spending money on on an Australian business when realistically our money is going overseas.
Well, do you think that Optus,
That's why I don't.
telco Optus,
That's
is
why I don't,
Australian?
that's why I don't shop with Optus.
People would say it's Australian, but it's not.
I don't.
Because
I
again,
don't.
if you do a search,
Again, I don't choose Optus as my telco. I choose Virgin Australia. Sorry, not Virgin Australia. I choose Vodafone. Sorry, which even Vodafone's not Australia,
it's
but
English.
it's English. It's UK. At least I get some like. Look, I know it's a bit hypocritical, but Vodafone, in a sense, doesn't say Vodafone Australia. Yes, I know that they used to a long time ago. They dropped that and they just call themselves Vodafone. But this is the thing. I'm seeing more and more people online say, I want to support Australia. I want to buy Australian. I want to support
So
small
support
businesses.
Qantas.
Yeah, well, but that's the only choice now.
Well, as far as a domestic and international airline, yes,
Do you
it's yeah,
do you think that the government was right by not bailing them out?
yes, I do.
And
I thought it was very cheeky of them to ask for billions of dollars to be bailed out, and when it was obvious that there was no way they could pay it back within 3 years, which was their offer, they said, "We want to borrow. How much was it? $2 billion,
1.4 billion.
1.4. Well, they're already in the red by about billion.
But this is the thing: a bank was
And
backing them.
they're saying if we don't make enough profit to pay you back within 3 years, there was no way they could make that much profit in 3 years. They said if we don't, we will give you a shareholding. The Australian government doesn't want a shareholding in it. The Australian government doesn't want a shareholding in airlines. They're
But
private businesses, and they're running at a loss. Or certainly, Virgin was running. Well, why do they want shares in a business that's making a loss? They don't. So of course they were going to say no to that idea.
you got to wonder though that surely there could have been a better, like, if coronavirus didn't happen and COVID-19 didn't happen, would they have survived? Their share prices dropped dramatically from April last year to now. They were trading at $1.32 at one stage, and then as the end of basically 2019, they kept dropping, dropping, dropping. The shareholders, or the 9% of shareholders, weren't happy with Virgin. You could tell it by the way the stocks were going. They were basically didn't want it. No one was trading it, so the price got lower and lower and lower. Now,
and this is why I was surprised when you said last week that you would buy shares in it, and I was they don't have the money to do that. I just thought
the reason why I buy shares in Virgin, and I stand by what I said, is it is so low, 0.85 cents. You just gamble. Like, that's a pretty damn good gamble. As long as they could see out this period, which clearly they can't, they would have gone back up, I think. I just don't see any reason why Virgin Australia would not have gone back up. I think their share prices would have gone back up. I think with a good marketing strategy, they could have succeeded. And yeah, maybe they needed to lower their cost. Maybe they needed to stop offering free food on their flights. Maybe there was no way that they could compete with Qantas. But with smart business management and by going back to their roots, which was the domestic roots, low cost budget airline that they once were.
Well, that was their Tiger Air branch.
But the Tiger Airways failed. Let's be realistic here. People didn't like Tiger Airways. Why? Because the customer service sucked, the security measures sucked, the lounge sucked. Everything that Tiger Airways was sucky, and basically like a kindergarten had slapped it together, or in this case, like a half done job of an airline. The thing is, you can't cut cost and think that people are gonna spend up big with you. You might be able to. One of the biggest complaints with Virgin Australia and Tiger Airways was leg space. Now, Qantas has the same leg space, according to Qantas and Virgin. They say, oh no, we're all the same. All that Virgin had to do, and yes, it would have meant that a row of seats were gone, but give us a little bit more leg space. That could have been a game changer.
It could have been one of the game changers, yes.
And like, okay, the whole alcohol on the flight, get rid of it. No one need, like, I get it, people like it, but realistically, free alcohol on a plane doesn't get me flying your business. I'm sorry, you don't need it. Just toss it. Like, the food. Whoever created the menu at Virgin, you were shit at it. Like, seriously, the food tastes disgusting. So get rid of it.
Why do you like Virgin so much?
I liked Virgin because they're friendly staff. Absolutely, 100%. The staff were fantastic. The customer service, whenever you had any issues, or just the politeness. I had one bad experience with Qantas, and that turned me off Qantas. With Virgin,
tell me about it.
Oh no! I nearly missed a flight because of Virgin. So you know how normally when they do gate changes, they tell you.
You mean Qantas, not Virgin?
Yeah, sorry, I meant Qantas. Sorry, my head is thinking Virgin. So when Qantas did a gate change at Perth Airport to go to Melbourne one day, I think it was Melbourne or Sydney, one or two. This was back when I was, it would have just been about 18, 19, something like that. I can't remember. It was a long time ago. They basically changed the gate number at the last minute, all because of a technical bloody thing. And do you think they told anyone? No. At least I didn't hear it. And if I didn't hear it and I nearly missed my flight because of it, I'm sorry. That's piss poor.
They would have called your name out over the public address.
That's basically how that's exactly how I got onto my flight, was because I heard my name called. But there I was sitting at a terminal that was, I thought, oh, this is a bit strange. Not many people sitting there here. Look, some people say it's my fault. I should have looked at the signs. But when your ticket says one thing and tickets tells you the gate, you go to that gate. That's simple as that.
Yeah, my personal policy with flying is you get the ticket, it says the gate on there, I read the sign. And often it's different.
Yeah, but
what's printed on the ticket is different from what the sign says. But I had one experience in Singapore where I read the sign. Yeah, the ticket says something. I read the sign and it said gate lounge number 35 or whatever it was. So I wandered off to the gate lounge and I was very early and I sat down and kind of had a rest. I might have been 2 hours early.
Yep.
Not a problem. Okay. I'll just have a rest before everyone turns up and everything starts. And no one turned up. And I'm sitting there. There's no signs, mind you.
Yeah.
Where I was, there were no signs.
At this time, there was no LED signs.
And I'm thinking to myself, wow, everyone better turn up soon because we should be boarding soon. And then a staff member walked up in their uniform. They said, are you supposed to be catching a flight to Perth, Australia? And I said, yes. And they said, oh, well, that's down there.
But this is the thing, like, at least in that instance, there was a person there to help you. With this instance, I think it was T1, Terminal 1 here in Perth. They didn't have the LED signs or the screens at the gates. They still had the old stuff. Look, they did update it after my 18th. And I think that was the biggest thing. It's like, if you're going to say one gate, put someone on there to redirect people to another gate. Just common sense.
Do they used to write up in the blackboard in those days?
No, not that old. No, they used to slide a card in and out of the thing. So, yeah. That's how old I am. But this is the thing, like, it's all about service. And look, until today, I did not know that Virgin Australia was not owned by Australians. I honestly, and that is a shock.
So if you knew that it was at least 81% owned by foreign airlines,
would I have flown them? I'm always in after a bargain, you know that, so most probably. But the thing is, like, I guess this is the thing. Like, I am a Qantas member as well. But I've never redeemed my Qantas points. I've never really. I think I have to renew it most probably. But that's only because I was with. Was it Flybuys that had the partnership with Qantas at the time?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was with Flybuys. So it was kind of like, you're with Flybuys, you're also with Qantas. But look, it's one of those things where I guess, like, competition. Now, in Perth we had Scoot Airlines as well. That is definitely foreign owned, and that was meant to take on Tiger Airways. Now, Scoot did really well. They were doing really well. However, Scoot, yes.
Scoot is Singaporean.
Yeah, well, they were in Australia. They're no longer in Australia from what I can tell. The reason I say that is because I think excuse me, I just burped. I think on Friday's episode, I said that I went to Scoot's website and it says they partnered with Virgin Australia. It was really interesting to see that Scoot or Fly Scoot exited from Australia to support Virgin Australia.
No, Scoot is owned by Singapore Airlines.
Yes, but Singapore Airlines is a major one of the major shareholders in Virgin Australia. True. Why would they create? Yes. This is the thing. Why would Singapore Airlines create competition for another airline that they're invested in?
Because because Scoot is a cut price airline. I've flown with them. They're a cut price airline.
Bad
Where,
customer
I mean,
service.
they're the cheapest of all. There's no one cheaper.
Yeah.
But maybe AirAsia, which is Malaysian. But Singapore Airlines divested themselves of Tiger Australia, which is a domestic internal airline, not an international one. Scoot is international.
Yeah.
So Scoot is kind of flying in competition to Virgin Australia, but Virgin Australia is a full service airline and Scoot is really, really basic.
It is, and look, I think
so. In that respect, it's not in competition.
Yeah, but if you're why did the thing is they exited Australia as well. They left Australia, so they were in Australia, then they disappeared. They fly
well,
one.
If they weren't making money, they're not going to come here.
Yeah, well, this is on 2019. They were in Australia, then they just up and left. 2018, sorry, 2018, 2019. They were in.
I flew them last year, which is 2019. I flew Scoot. I think I did.
Well, according to their website now, they don't fly in Australia. They partner with Virgin, which clearly Virgin's gone. They'll be flying. Well, maybe coming back and maybe not. Like, I don't know. What do you think will happen?
Maybe it'll become Scoot Australia.
Oh, I hope not. I really do hope not.
That'd be if Singapore Airlines was a bidder for Virgin Australia.
Okay, so let's talk about the shareholders. There's two airlines that we know of. H&A, we don't 100% know what they do, but they're definitely a Chinese company. But let's look at the two airlines. You got Etihad Airlines and you got Singapore Airlines. Now, I understand there's other airlines going to bid for Virgin, or at least for the assets of Virgin, which is really interesting because if they go into liquidation or voluntary administration, which means their assets are sold, that there's a number of ways you can do assets. Someone could just buy the name of Virgin Australia. Someone could just buy the planes. What's more valuable, do you think? Do you think it's the name? Do you think it's the planes? Do you think that right now the scrap metal from the planes might be more valuable?
No. When they say the assets, what they're talking about is they want to buy the aircraft and they want to buy the terminals.
Oh, the terminals
the
are
leases. They want the leases on the terminals and they want the aircraft so they can literally set up their own airline under their own name.
Well, that's the thing. The terminals are the most valuable thing. That's by a long shot. Absolutely. You lease a terminal.
Because if you want to set up an airline in Australia and you don't have an airline, you don't have any correction. If you want to set up an airline in Australia and you don't have terminals, you don't have anything.
Yeah. So my question.
You've got to have the terminals. So assets means they want the leases on the terminals, and they also want the all the baggage equipment. The carousels. They want all the lounge. They want all that.
So that's the thing with Perth Airport. Because we're in Perth, the Virgin Lounge has been redone a few years ago, I think, because Qantas moved over to their whole different terminal, and Virgin got more space. So that's a pretty hefty section of airport that they get, and one where if you're going to T1 and 2, you know that's Virgin because you can see the Virgin logo. So that's prime real estate. Look, what do you think should happen to Virgin? Do you think that Virgin should be back? Like, okay, if I would agree to a bailout on the following proviso. Here's my proviso. 1, all the Chinese shareholders leave, meaning that those shares are brought by the Australian government, and then the Australian government, over the 3-year period, sells them to the public, sells them to the Australian citizens. which means that the way that they could recoup their $1.4 billion is by offering the public the option to buy Virgin Australia only if you're an Australian citizen. I know it sounds crazy.
Let me explain something. The Chinese are pulling a Swiftie as we speak. They're pulling a Swiftie because the Chinese own no less than 40% of Virgin Australia.
That's why I'm saying get rid of them. I'm saying get rid of them.
Virgin Australia is going into voluntary receivership, correct?
Administration.
Voluntary administration, same thing.
By Deloitte.
Okay. And yet the Chinese own 40% of it, okay? Now, the way it works is this. The receivers are looking for a buyer to buy those assets.
Totally. Which
the Chinese would hope they'll get a certain amount of money for those assets.
But they could just buy it themselves.
The airline itself, the airline, Virgin Australia, is in deep debt. It's already I heard the number $5 billion. So the Chinese government has got 40% minimum shares in a company that is already $5 billion in debt, but it has assets.
Yeah.
If they can sell those assets, that is the aircraft, which may be leased or owned, probably leased. If they can buy the terminals, which are leased or owned, probably leased. But nevertheless, they're buying asset. Someone wants to buy that so they can set up a new airline.
Yeah.
The Chinese can then sell that asset and get money. Otherwise, they've got debt. $5 billion debt, which is no good to them. Instead, they can let that go by going into receivership, which means the debt is written off, and instead they get the money from the sale of the assets. So they get something, right? At the same time,
but don't you have to pay back the debt if you do go into voluntary administration? You do have to pay back the debt, or at least attempt to pay back the debt.
No. You have to pay back certain debts and not others. You only have to pay back the debts which are there's a word for it. But basically, you don't have to pay back all the debts. So, for example, you probably don't have to pay back debt to a lot of contractors. You may have to pay debt back to staff. You may have to pay debt to some people that you've bought product from. It depends on the contract. Okay, so some people will not have within their contract with Virgin Australia, they won't have the guarantees in their contract, which means diddly squat, they lost the lot.
Yeah,
they got nothing. So it's not $5 billion that's in debt. It's a lesser amount, whatever that may be. The administrators would know what that is. 3 Chinese airlines: China Southern, China Eastern, and China Airlines. 3 of them, which are owned by the Chinese government, have proposed that they purchase Virgin Australia from the 40% Chinese ownership of the Australian government. You see what they're doing?
You said Australian government.
They want
you just said
correction of the Chinese government. So, in other words, part of the Chinese government wants to buy 100% of an asset in Australia that is 40% owned by the Chinese government. They want to buy it from themselves.
Yep. It is
so that they can get those assets all for themselves.
But that
not have to share it with Sir Richard Branson or Singapore Airlines.
But that 40% of their I get it, like, but we're not talking about the Chinese government, these 3 airlines just buying the 40%. They're actually buying the full 100% of the thing.
They want the whole lot. Which means it's a takeover bid.
Yeah, it's a really
in effect, it's a shareholding takeover bid where they've got 40% of the company. They want 100%, and they're doing it through the company going broke.
But is that their fault? Like, I mean it from the point of view is the Singapore Airlines, sorry, not Singapore Airlines, HNA and Nasashan, or however you pronounce it, they most probably don't control too much. Like, yes, they have 40%, but that's more. That's less than 51%. Someone
Correct.
now,
So they're trying to work an angle so they can get 100%.
I totally get that, but that's one scenario. But the thing is, and I hate to throw another rumor out here, or oh, look at this. We have the COVID virus from China. Now we have an airline going under. China will reap the benefits from this airline going under, most likely, from a virus that came from their country. I'm not being racist. I'm not being discriminatory. I'm not saying that China deliberately did this. But why are we allowing, or why will the government allow a Chinese company, most probably, because I'm sure it would still have to go through legal stuff, but why the Australian government needs to step in and say, look, yes, you're in administration. However, we need to put laws in place that protect any company that goes into administration from being foreignly owned in the future.
And the Australian government, through the Foreign
Investment
Review Board, will not allow the Chinese to have 100% of it.
It's going to be a very interesting one to watch. And
I'm just going to say there was a parallel to exactly what I'm talking about that has occurred before. You may remember you may remember the 10 television network in Australia was owned by News Corp.
Yep.
Murdoch. And it went broke.
And CBS got it.
Under Murdoch's tutelage, it went broke.
But we've got to be real here. Murdoch wanted to buy it again.
Murdoch's son wanted to buy it again, and CBS bought it and got it, slipped in under them and got it, which meant that Murdoch didn't get it, and he went nuts.
Yep.
He was doing appeals and all sorts of things. I think he went to the High Court. He was doing all sorts of things because he and his father basically sent it broke to wipe off all the debts and then buy it back again, which is the same sort of thing we're talking about now. But instead, CBS slipped in and got it, and the administrators gave it to CBS and basically said, Murdoch's, you stuffed it up, you sent it broke, we're going to give it to CBS.
I think that's a little bit different, though, because CBS did not just replace all the shares. Like, they didn't buy 100% of the shares. That was the biggest thing that was going to be the issue. Was with CBS, it was like, we can't have a foreign government or a foreign company own 100% of Channel 10. So the biggest thing was, how are they going to help out the current shareholders? Now, I think that you can still be shareholders of Channel 10, but CBS basically owns 51% of Channel 10, maybe even more.
CBS provides programming and expertise and financial clout, and Channel 10 is now become a fantastic television network. And I think 9 has gone down. 7 at the top, 10, 9. That's the way I read it anyway, as far as commercial networks are concerned. So I think 10 is far better off now. It's moved from a number 3 position, I believe, to a number 2 position at the cost of Channel 9. Now, if a new owner comes in, whoever that may be, and buys Virgin, it could actually become very, very competitive with Qantas. And that's where someone said this, Virgin going down is not necessarily a good thing for Qantas.
Yeah.
Because up until now, it's been a good thing for Qantas because Qantas has been out in front. Another airline could potentially come along, or group of airlines could come along and grab Virgin Australia, rename it, and turn it into something phenomenal. They potentially could, because it's got the terminals, because it's got the aircraft. I've heard speculation, people talking who say that the Virgin went wrong by trying to become an overseas airline, that they should have just remained domestic and not tried to compete on the international scale, flying to the US and New Zealand. Well, maybe New Zealand would have been okay, but various other places they should just basically remain domestic. I'll include New Zealand as part of the domestic for the sake of what we're talking about.
Yep.
Now, just while we're talking about airlines, what do you think of my Star Trek shirt?
I didn't actually notice it. To tell you the honest truth, look, I was trying to find out Channel 10's shareholders just so that we can actually comment on basically who it is. But basically, from what I can see is the Wikipedia page doesn't tell me much, but Australian Security Exchange since December 2019 has been owned by Viacom CBS Network, UK and Australia. So basically, the UK, there's a Viacom CBS, not CBS, but Viacom CBS, UK and Australia company that basically owns all of it. Look, this is a really interesting topic, and I think one that we're both most probably not qualified to talk about, but it's
Who cares?
it is about a rant. Really, it's all about spicing it up during this COVID-19 time. I think what we should do before we duck off is we've got some interesting news. No new cases in WA yesterday.
Correct.
That now,
and I think it was no new cases in Victoria. Am I right?
I'm not sure. I only know about WA.
Yeah, I think it was no new cases in Victoria either.
We do have 7 new cases, however, Australia-wide, bringing the total to 6,619. Still 71 deaths, still 49 serious. It does mean that our recovery rate is 64.33%, and it does look like the current infection numbers are dropping. They've dropped quite low, so that's really good.
I'm wondering, if you look at the charts, how are we comparing with New Zealand? Because I know New Zealand is doing really, really well.
I don't have New Zealand up here right now, so I can't give you that number.
I saw they got down to an infection rate of like 0.4 something percent. It was like less than half a percent infection rate.
So yesterday they had
run out.
Yesterday they had 9 new infections. So maybe not.
Where? New Zealand.
New Zealand, yep. So their total is 1,440. Still the same deceased. And no, their numbers aren't. They're stable. They're stable. Let's call it a stable. They've flattened the curve and they're still flat. So that's the numbers for you. We're not going to go into the US.
Have they flattened the curve or are they going down?
They've flattened the curve. Well, actually, their curve is still kind of slightly up.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just
so
slightly.
Maybe they're not doing as well as Australia.
No, I think okay, so let me give you the percentages here. Their mortality rate is 0.83%, where Australia's mortality rate is 1.07%. So I think they're doing it very, very well.
Yeah, they are.
Look,
the thing is, once the way I'm looking at it is this, and this is tied in with airlines. Once New Zealand has got themselves into a really good space, and Australia has, the Australian states can open their borders between each other again and open the borders with New Zealand as well and start to move between the two. Sure. That'll be good for tourism between the two countries. It'll be good for business between the two countries. It'll be good for the airlines, whoever the airlines happen to be.
My concern with Air New Zealand is how... Right now they're not flying. Air New Zealand's not flying at the moment.
Right.
They might be flying inside New Zealand, but that's not going to last, considering that there's a lockdown.
They're lifting part of their lockdown in 1 week's time.
Yes, but that's not the point. The point is, how is Virgin Airlines staying afloat? I get it that because they're not running, they don't have a cost, but they still have a cost because they have to rent these terminals around the world. I understand, again, New Zealand is owned by the New Zealand government, or a large percentage of it is by the New Zealand government, and I'm sure that they're bailing it out, as they would need to. I think that's the smartest move that the New Zealand
Virgin Australia is being paid at the moment by the Australian government to keep flying.
But they won't be flying.
At a skeleton level.
But they won't be flying. They go into voluntary administration tomorrow, or as of midnight tonight. They won't fly.
Their administrators can keep it going. or they can crash it and stop it from
If I,
going,
if I,
depending on
Well,
what they
okay,
decide.
so let's say you're Deloitte for a second before we end tonight. Let's say you're Deloitte, which is the
Yeah,
company that's going to most likely, well, according to news articles, they're going to be taking it into administration. What
right.
would you do? Because on one hand, you've got the government giving you some money to do these flights, but on the other hand, you've got no customers that could potentially need your airline. You don't have to worry about having to refund tickets. Well, of course, you might have some refund tickets, but right now is the perfect time to close it off and to
Yeah,
just
but if the Australian government is literally chartering their aircraft to fly between capital cities,
get that part.
so people can get from one place to another, they're being paid. They're
No,
making money
but
to
they're not.
keep those aircraft in the air.
Yes, but I'm not. I'm not talking about that part. They might
Oh,
have a
okay.
contract. They might have a contract with the Australian government to do that part. That's not what I'm saying. I'm
Right.
asking you, what if you were Deloitte and you had the choice right now to say, right, we'll finish off this contract with the Australian government, but no more airlines, no more aircrafts will be flying the skies from today onwards, meaning no more costs except for maybe some hangar costs or some storage costs. So very limited costings, and you're only flying the ones that the government or that has been chartered. You're most likely going to have to do some refunds with a small number of people because there might be some people that have booked, but a lot of people would have already asked for their refund because of the COVID-19 thing, which I think didn't help with the share price. That's mostly why everything's happened, because you got to pay back your customers. If the customers want refunds, they get refunds. That's the law. Well, within the law, like, yeah, this
Yeah.
is you know what I'm saying.
The administrators, their job is, if the business can continue to trade itself out of its problems, they can then run the business as administrators to get it back on its feet again.
Okay, so let me ask
But
you.
I don't think it can. I think it's beyond that.
Let's give it the benefit of the doubt for a second. Let's say it could return if it wasn't the CEO and the current board of directors running this company.
They're out. They're out.
Yep. Hang on. Bear with me. Let's say Deloitte looks at it and goes, actually, this can be a profitable business, but it needs to be done this way. How much rule book does an administrator have to survive, to make a company survivable or to make a company profitable? Like, can they run it for a period of 12 months?
Yes,
Are they allowed
yes.
to?
Some administrators of some businesses can run that business for a year, 2 years, in an attempt at least to get the company back on its feet.
And do
And
you
then they
sell it?
can say, "Oh, forget this," and just sell it off, and just say, "Well, we tried," and then sell it off.
But
They can do that.
what happens to where do they get the money from? Like, let's say, like,
From trading, from actually trading the business. And maybe they could sell off some assets along the way. So just for example,
they tried that with Ansett.
Yeah, the administrators could come along and they could say, all right, we're going to sell half of the aircraft. We're going to downsize this airline and no international. We're just going to run domestic flights. And they could say, we're only going to run domestic flights between Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne, for example. And that's it, and nothing more than that. They could do that. And then say, therefore, we're going to get rid of all the other terminals, we're going to get rid of all the other aircraft, and we're just going to concentrate on that part of it only. They could.
I honestly wouldn't. Okay, so let's say they do that. What happens to these shareholders? Do they because clearly they still own the shares.
So
if this administrator has put all this work in and can somehow make Virgin Australia back to a profitable business, why should these shareholders benefit? They shouldn't.
It's not the shareholders' fault.
If we go by what you said earlier, it is the shareholders' fault because the 40% Chinese-owned businesses are trying to basically not bail out they're trying to do a takeover bid,
Oh,
possibly.
well, yeah, they're trying to do a takeover bid, but ultimately, the problem for the airline is one, COVID. That's the thing that put the nails in the coffin.
Absolutely.
Two, their difficult situation trying to compete with a very well established Qantas. They've come up to try and compete with a very established, powerful competitor, and also their own management.
Yep.
The management that has been running the thing for the last so many years.
Well, see,
I mean, I put it down to those three.
oh, I definitely say it's the management for number one. I think COVID number two. I think instead of looking at and I don't think any company has really protected themselves. If you get what I mean, like Qantas is asking for money from the government. Rex Airlines is asking money from the government. All the airlines in a stimulus package of $715 million is getting money from the government. So clearly, none of these airlines have made themselves immune to something like this. And
I don't think there's an airline in the world that is immune to it.
I'm not saying that any airline is immune to it. What I'm saying is none of these companies have put assets away or cash away for a rainy day like this. I understand there's cost, and I'm sure it's in the millions of dollars to run an airline each day. But there are profitable airlines out there, very profitable airlines out there. They are going to survive because they may have put money in the bank and not wasted it.
I don't think so. They've been the airlines generally, as compared to other businesses, are running on the edge. They have fuel prices are going up and down. They buy new aircraft, which then puts them into debt to buy the new aircraft. They've got to get rid of the old ones and get new ones, and all sorts of things. So as a result, they're not flush with money. I don't think any airline is particularly flush with money. They're being propped up by their governments, by and large.
Yep. Look, it's one of the conversations that we could keep going into all night, but we are going to wrap it up here. I want to thank you, Peter, for being on the show. I do have to say that this episode is proudly brought to you by hempoilsurfer.com for all
that
your...
sounds interesting.
It is very interesting. Look, they got some great products. CBD oil. They've got some lip balm by the looks of it. That is hemp. They've got some body scrub stuff. Look, just head over to their website. I highly recommend their website. Go to hempoilsurfer.com and check out the products there. They're really
What's that website?
Too. Hempoilsurfer.com. So that's HEMPRFER. Yep.
Okay.
So hempoilsurfer.com. The link is in our description of the video. Please head over and support them because they're supporting us. And tomorrow we're going to be talking about something else. We're going to rant about something else. I'm not quite sure what yet.
You're going to surprise me with whatever it is.
Well, that's normally how it works, isn't it?
We've been talking about airlines all night. Can I plug my airline? Star Trek!
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, look, we hope that you've enjoyed this live broadcast on Facebook Live. For more information about our shows, head over to drn1.com.au. Click on the show link where you can see all of our great shows. We will be podcasting all of these episodes a day late. So if you do want to subscribe to the podcast, please head over to drn1.com.au/shows/rant show and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. New episodes coming out daily, and also head over to our YouTube channel, DRN1 Live. DRN1 Live. The link is also on our Facebook page, which if you just go to facebook.com/DRN1 Live, that's the number 1 live, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel through Facebook. Peter, thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me.
And to everyone else, good night and stay safe.
And stay safe, everyone, and stay home.
Oh, we'll talk about alcohol limits there tomorrow. Alcohol